When I was about 13 or 14, I lived on a farm in North Carolina. Unlike typical farms with fields of crops, ours was a pine tree plantation. Pine needles are a valuable landscaping commodity, so we essentially lived in a forest, harvesting pine straw annually. Our house was situated in the middle of 550 acres of perfectly aligned longleaf pines. The living room of our house featured a massive picture window, stretching nearly the entire length of the 50-foot room. The house itself was a peculiar custom build from the 1930s, designed by a dentist, and sat on a gentle hill. This elevation meant that the living room was about 5 or 6 feet above ground level, offering a vantage point overlooking a solid mile of pine trees. During winter, the scene could be unsettling. A light dusting of snow would reflect the moonlight, allowing us to see our dogs roaming around at night. To be honest, that room and its enormous window always gave me the creeps. One weekend, I had my cousin over, and we were doing what kids do in the countryside, tossing random things into the fireplace to see how they'd react. As the night wore on and the fire dwindled, we built a grand fort out of couch cushions and blankets in the living room, preparing to sleep there. Everything was ordinary until we heard our dogs barking. Their barks sounded distant, suggesting they were somewhere on the property chasing off nocturnal animals. My cousin began staring out the expansive window, silent and fixated. Sensing something was off, I asked, "What's up?" He murmured that he felt like he was seeing things. Anxiety bubbled up inside me as I joined him, pressing my face against the cold glass, scanning the moonlit expanse of trees. For several minutes, nothing happened. I peppered him with questions, but he shushed me, trying to concentrate. Then, we both saw it, a shadowy figure moving from one tree to another, not running or leaping, just a brisk walk. This figure was approximately 100 yards from the house. Given the moonlight reflecting off the snowy ground, it was hard to discern if the person was approaching. Oddly, we didn't immediately panic. There was a part of us that doubted what we saw, thinking our eyes might be playing tricks. We considered waking my dad but hesitated because he's the type who would step onto the patio with his rifle and shout into the woods, a prospect that felt more terrifying than the unknown outside. We were scared but agreed not to provoke whatever was out there. Over the next half hour, the unsettling sightings continued. Every few minutes, we'd spot another figure, sometimes about 50 feet from the previous sighting, moving between trees. There were at least 2 figures, appearing and vanishing intermittently. It's worth noting that we didn't have nearby neighbors. The land surrounding our farm was owned by federal paper, I'm not sure who owns it now, consisting of miles upon miles of untouched trees. Seeing anyone near our property, especially at night, was highly unusual unless they had a purpose for being there. As we continued to watch, one of the figures appeared again, but this time, instead of disappearing behind a tree, it started running towards us. That was our breaking point. We lost our composure and rushed to wake my dad. By the time we dragged him, half asleep, into the living room, the figures were gone. Nonetheless, we frantically went around locking every door and window. Living in such a remote area, we rarely locked anything, so this act was both unusual and nerve-wracking. Each door we approached carried the dread of possibly confronting whoever was outside, though thankfully, that never happened. After securing the house, we convinced my dad to sleep in the living room with us as we kept vigil by the window. I never understood why he didn't call the police. He always had a "we take care of our own" mindset, making dialing 911 seem out of the question. The following day, curiosity drove us to investigate. Sure enough, the snow bore footprints everywhere. We saw tracks between the trees and, most chillingly, right in front of our massive window. Given the living room's elevation, about 7 feet above ground, the figures would have been standing just beneath our line of sight, unseen yet uncomfortably close. When I was 13, my family and I were living with my grandparents. In my aunt's room, there was a 2-foot-tall Victorian-style doll that had been converted into a lamp. To turn it on, you had to hold the doll's cold, plastic hand and raise or lower its arm. The doll stood on a nightstand next to my aunt's bed, facing the door, greeting everyone who entered with a creepy, dead-eyed smile. One day, I was alone in the house and needed a blanket from my aunt's closet. Fortunately for me, there were two factors that worked in my favor. One, it was mid-afternoon, so I didn't need to turn on the lamp, and two, the closet was conveniently located right next to the door. I kept my gaze fixed on the floor as I entered the room, not daring to look at the doll. I quickly turned to face the closet, my back now towards the doll, and opened the door to grab a blanket. But as I reached down, I noticed something was different. The room seemed brighter. The light was on. The tiny hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I froze, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. My survival instinct kicked in, telling me to run, but before I could move, I made the mistake of looking back. I wish I hadn't looked. When I turned to exit the room, I saw that the doll's hand was raised, pointing directly at me. That haunting image has been burned into my memory ever since. I may have shared this before, but I don't quite remember. This happened when I was in high school, sitting at the dining room table doing homework. From where I sat, I had a clear view of the front door. Our front door at the time had a pane of glass about 2 by 5 feet, with a lace curtain draped over it. It was probably around 9 p.m., and the night outside was pitch black. The porch light wasn't on, so the only illumination was from inside the house. Suddenly, I heard a noise, like someone was on the porch. My attention was immediately drawn to the front door. As I watched, I saw the screen door slowly opening. It stayed open for what felt like an eternity, but there was no one there, or, if there was, they were dressed completely in black. I was frozen in place, my heart pounding, waiting to see what would happen next. Then, just as slowly, the screen door began to close. It didn't slam shut. Instead, it was eased back into place as if someone was deliberately trying to be quiet. After that, I don't clearly remember if I heard footsteps or not. Maybe whoever was there saw me watching and decided to slip away quietly.